Hey everyone, Jared from Rate My Radio here, and let me say happy 2000 or happy New Year to all of our viewers. Now, you probably haven't seen a video from me from quite some time, and that's because I've been tied up with mainly family issues and actually playing ham radio because it's a lot of fun. I've been caught up in FT8 a little bit. I've always loved digital mode, so I just managed to get my 80 meter DXCC just using a G5RV up 45 feet, so it can be done. And my 30 meter DXCC, so 100 countries worked and confirmed in Logbook of the World. So been having a bit of fun playing radio using the 7610 there, of course. But other things have happened as well. I've been involved in the Ham Radio Facebook group and helping moderate that. And that's really what brings me to today's video. And that's because we see a lot of questions about handhelds. Now for a lot of us, we'll sit back and we'll think, oh, handhelds, you know. That's what I bought when I was first getting into the hobby. And that's the truth of the matter. Handhelds generally are what you buy when you're first getting into the hobby. They're often your first radio. My first radio is on the table here. And, you know, there is a bit of demand for knowing a little bit more about them. So in this video I'm going to talk about the different handhelds on the market, used handhelds, new handhelds, certain modes and that, what to look for, and what some of the differences are, how to get the best handheld for your first radio, if that's going to be the case. Now, of course, anyone looking to buy a new handheld in today's market, maybe you've got an old one like this Alinco DJ G5 now that you want to upgrade from, this video will still be useful for those people. But if this is your first foray into amateur radio, this could be a very helpful video. So I'll start off with my first one, and this is quite a funny story actually. This is a Yaesu VX3. Now, the Yaesu VX3 was later cloned as the Baofeng UV3R and sold for about, I don't know, $20 US or something. But this is the genuine Yaesu one, and the interesting story is that it's my first radio, and I actually got it when I was on holiday. Now, why did I get it when I was on holiday? It was because I didn't have a ham radio license at the time, and I was interested in the hobby, but I was too scared to go to the local ham store and buy a radio. Now, it's debatable about whether you should own a radio or not when you're not licensed to, but the guiding rule in most countries is as long as you use it as a listening device and you intend to get a ham radio license, many people do find themselves buying something like a handheld or a cheap receiver and doing a bit of shortwave listening before they get into the hobby. So I got this in Malaysia. I remember dragging my I can't remember if she was my wife at the time or not, that's how bad my memory is, but I remember dragging my wife onto a train, and then we did a bit of walking and we went to the local ham radio store, and it was purchased with not too many questions asked. I think they were quite shocked to see a English speaker enter the store, and which was a typical Asian sort of store in a mall, you know, as its own little section rather than being a complete store. And yeah, I bought the radio and enjoyed it for the rest of the trip. The interesting thing about this little tiny radio here is that it has a AM receiver for the entire shortwave band. So I remember, you know, after my wife had fallen asleep, going outside and you know, putting a bigger antenna on it and trying to see what international broadcasts I could pick up from, you know, on the beaches of one of the resorts. So that's not the only reason I've held on to it, but that's my first ham radio, and I suspect a lot of people will be getting a handheld for their first radio. So that comes down to what should we buy. Now I want to talk about the different options. You've got options like buying a second-hand radio. This is an Alinco DJ G5, Delta Juliet Golf 5. Very old radio now, but it's capable of some amazing things. One, the battery input voltage can vary. So depending on the size of the battery pack, the radio expected, you know, up to 9.6 volts. And what this meant was, when I got this radio, it was given to me by my Alma, it had a dead NiCad battery pack. I pulled the battery pack apart and I stuck two lithium ion cells in it. So you you know, the nice thing was this radio, because of its ability to take different voltages, I could just bang lithium-ion batteries in there and get it back alive. Now I modified the charger to use an intelligent charging circuit. Obviously, you can't just drop it in the normal charger, but you know, two of those big 18650 cells gives this radio, you know, you can have up to 5 amp hours of capacity if you invest in some really high quality cells. So that, as old as it may seem, this radio can have longer battery life than any of the new ones on the table there. This one I think's got about 2600 amp hour at 7.4 volts, so it's got quite a bit of battery capacity. But not only can it do that, it's, you know, it is big and bulky, but it also has a crossband repeat feature. So my Elmer was into the Scouts, and what they used to do with these is they'd put them in a sealed bag and they'd winch them up, throw a rope over a tree, winch them up, and then they'd have their repeater for the site. So, you know, don't immediately discount a second-hand handheld. A lot of them have features that aren't seen in the newer handhelds, and that's because the handheld market is very much driven by trends. And that's one thing I want to talk about. So, at the moment, I guess, the most popular digital mode, the most popular commercial digital mode is Yaesu's System Fusion, and that's partly driven by the fact it's easily linked to the Wires X, the Wires X internet repeater linking and node linking system is very easy to set up. So that's a very popular digital mode here at the moment, at least in Australia, and it's the FT70D, so Fox Tango 70 Delta handheld there, is actually a very good value handheld for the money. And I'll talk a bit more about the Yaesu System Fusion a little bit later in another video, but I just wanted to mention that, yeah, the handheld market is very trend driven. So at the moment, digital modes are the trend, and you've got your two competing, I guess, modes for popularity now, Yaesu System Fusion and DMR. Now this is a very good quality Chinese radio. It's an Islands. It's made by Redivus. They were kind enough to send me this one actually, and the interesting thing about the Islands is it was the first DMR radio, and DMR comes from a commercial background. It was the first DMR radio that was able to be set up fully just by entering commands on the radio itself. You didn't have to use a bit of software to program it to get onto the DMR system, and I successfully proved that. I read about DMR, I put in all the codes that were required, the talk groups and that sort of thing, and I jumped on one of the Australian repeaters, and a guy said to me, "Oh, you haven't set this right," and I went and set it, and away we go. So at the moment, when it comes to handhelds, the current market, as I said, it's very trend driven and it's about digital. And if you're really interested in digital modes, unfortunately in Australia, our newer hams, the foundation license class, they're not allowed to use digital modes, which is really stupid, but they're not. But for the rest of the world who are allowed to use digital modes, and it might be a first radio, you're probably going to want to pick between either a traditional, if you're interested in digital modes, a traditional big three Japanese manufacturer like Yaesu, or one of the high quality Chinese brands like Redivus and that Island. So anyway, I think that sort of covered the topic of the fact handhelds are very much a trend driven product. And it's partly to do with price. For us hams who've been in the hobby a while, they are one of the cheaper items we can buy at the ham store. So I think the manufacturers kind of take advantage of that. They go, well, you know, Jarrad's going to walk down to Strictly Ham, and you know he's probably got a couple of hundred in his ham bank account. How can we innovate or make something new that he'll spend his money on? And I think that's really what the handheld market is. So anyway, that said, let me talk about some of the trends that have existed. So obviously you've got this Alinco. I'd say it's at least 20 years old. You'd have to correct me if I'm wrong, but at its time, battery life, functionality, all that sort of thing was a trend. It's still a 2 meter and 70 centimeter radio. It does have dual band watch, it can do crossband repeat. It's very much a full function radio. And obviously all of these radios can actually pick up other FM services, so maybe the fire service if it's still not encrypted in your country, stuff like that. But that was very much let's put as many features as we can into a radio. Now when they progressed from that, they went into things like this Yaesu VX7R. And the innovation that this really brought was this is fully waterproof. I think you can, the official spec is you can dunk it in water for 30 minutes and you won't have any problems. And you can tell that this is there's actually a little seal around that battery, that compartment sealed. It has a magnesium body, so it's quite light, and you know, there are gasket seals everywhere. Now the other interesting thing when they're making these radios, and that was what was in fashion, I'll show another water seal thing. If you use an external hand mic, there's a water seal around the connector that goes in there. But the other thing they were interested in pursuing at the time was band capabilities. So this is actually capable of 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. Alinco, their DJ G7 or Golf 7 radio, it actually did 2 meters, 220 megahertz. I can't remember the exact frequency of that, but it's the American band. I think it's 1.25 meters or something like that. Someone correct me. It would do 70 centimeters, and it would also do 13 centimeters or 1.2 gigahertz. So before the digital revolution that we're in now, band capability and I guess waterproofing and that were really the thing. So that's, once again, this is a radio you might be able to pick up second. It's a VX7R, Victoria X-Ray-7 Romeo, or Echo if you're in Europe. And even though it doesn't have digital modes, it does have 6 meters, it is waterproof, and it's quite a good radio. The only downside, I guess, is battery life, but you can get some aftermarket bigger batteries. I don't know whether they're worth it or not. I have tested some aftermarket batteries. They're okay, but the nice thing is it does use lithium-ion batteries, so you are using a current battery technology. Now that also takes us to the other thing that was innovation at that time period, and we're sort of talking, I guess, you know, the 2000 sort of era around there, was size. And Yaesu especially innovated in size, and they, with this Victoria X-Ray 3, they decided to see how many features they could cram into the one radio. And I should mention this also has the VX7 also has a general coverage shortwave receiver in it. It can do AM and that. None of them can do SSB, but this can do AM up to I think 30 megahertz. It's actually got a ferrite bar antenna built into it, so you don't need an external antenna. You can select between the two, and it is basically just packed full of features. I don't know if the battery is charged in this one. Oh, it is. Yep, it is charged. And you know, I've got this program to listen to, you know, the CB channels. It won't transmit on them, obviously. A lot of handhelds won't transmit on UHF CB. Don't buy if you're not allowed to do it in Australia. They're not type approved by ACMA, but don't go and buy a Yaesu or something, or a Big 3 radio and expect it to work on UHF CB. It's not going to. Even if you free band it or use the Mars mod, they actually optimize the transmitters, so they just won't transmit that high. So that's just a warning there. If you're actually wanting to transmit on CB, it's not a replacement for a CB radio, but you can listen to them. As I said, you can also listen to shortwave stations. So Yaesu crammed this thing full of features. Yes, it only transmits on 2 and 70 centimeters. I think it's only 2 watts or 3 watts or next to nothing. If you do actually run it at full power, you'll flatten it like crazy. And one thing worth mentioning is that the small size, it's cute, it fits in your top pocket, but if you're having a rag chew with someone, my hand gets sore, and I don't even have big hands, but my hand gets sore pushing down that push to talk button. So I actually find that while I like this radio as a example of technology and the fact that it was my first ham radio, it's not very practical. Please don't buy something this small as your first handheld. You're not really going to enjoy it. Now that goes for the Baofeng UV3R. Don't let the fact that they've essentially, almost completely copied the Yaesu, and I'll give you an example of when I say almost completely copied, you know, hey look, the back cover fits on. Now, even though they've copied the plastic moulding, they're nowhere near the same radio. These Baofengs, these Chinese radios, it was I guess a big trend in probably the mid 2010s, so the last 5 years or so that have hit in the market. They all sort of use the same chipset, I guess, the same transceiver. That one's flat, this one isn't. But they only do 2 and 70 centimeters. They don't have the receiver capability of the big three Yaesu radios. I mean, this was a $250 USD radio. That's a $20 USD radio. You can't expect it to be the same thing, and it's not the same thing. That said, which radio's a better purchase? Well, probably the Baofeng, because when you get sick of holding down the push to talk, you've only spent 20 bucks. So unless you want and you can still buy these, they're still current production. Unless you want a technological marvel, it's probably a little small for most hands, I'd suggest. Anyway, while we're talking about Chinese radios, and they're sort of the next trend that hit the market, as I said, they're all 2 and 70 centimeter radios. They don't offer the general coverage receivers that the big three, the Yaesu radios did in this instance, or the ICOM radios would have. But what they do offer is their frequency agility on transmit is a lot wider. So basically, they'll transmit in places where they shouldn't, and that's just going to get you in trouble. Don't do it. Now in Australia there is a clause saying if you're in an emergency situation, well, you can use the radio. And look, if you're stuck in the Australian desert and dying, maybe it's worth trying to transmit on UHF-CV with one of these. But if that's your backup plan, you're probably a little bit foolish, because I remember being bogged out on New Year's Day outside of Western Australia, and let's just say that my completely legal type approved UHF-CV was pretty useless. I ended up walking 5 kilometres, and after that I invested more heavily in recovery gear for my 4-wheel drive. So if you're going to buy one of these and say, oh, I'm going to modify it so it can transmit on CB bands in an emergency, and you actually think that's going to help, it's not. So my advice is, if you do buy one of these radios, lock it down, make it only transmit in the amateur radio frequencies in your country, and have a compliant radio. You know, if you're a new ham and the radio inspector comes by, you don't want to get into an argument about the potential apocalypse. You want to have a radio that, you know, is just set up to transmit where you're allowed to. This one I've got, this is actually a Baofeng UV, or United Victor 82L. Part of the reason for the aforementioned frequency agility is these are, I guess, set up to be a commercial radio. And what I have found with these Chinese radios is the ones that look more commercial, you know, the ones that don't look like a clone or like a faddish item like the UV5R, the ones that look more serious, they're the better radios. They're more reliable, they're easy to use, they have they can have channelized mode, or frequency just put in the frequency. They're the better radios. Now, there has been some concern that the spectral products, the spectral emissions on the Baofengs aren't up to scratch. Once again, I'm a pragmatist. Given the price of these things, and I think a UV82L, if you can still get one, is probably like $30 US. We're not going to stop these things appearing on the market, but what I can say is, if you're going to buy one as your first radio, and I'm not necessarily discouraging it, be aware that there are a lot of people who'd be described as haters of these radios because they're not as clean as a traditional radio in terms of transmit spectral purity. But as I said, go for the more commercial models. Don't go for the ones that say they've got 8 watts instead of 5 or whatever. Just go for because the Chinese are just bumping the the chip up. They're just pushing the linear, or not so linear amplifier, but they're pushing the amplifier in the radio beyond its design specification. That's going to make it dirtier. Go for the conservative, commercial-looking model, and you won't have any problems. Now, the nice thing about the UV82L is it's dual band. It doesn't, sorry, not dual band. It's got dual watch functionality, but it's also got dual transmit functionality. So let me put that. Can I put that in memory mode or not? I had mine listening to a UHF frequency for some reason. I can't remember the exact command, but it was easy enough to use. And the nice thing is it's got a 2-position push button. So you could have your local 2-meter repeater as your first frequency, your local 70cm repeater as your second frequency, and if you want to talk on the 2-meter one, you push the top of the button. If you want to talk on the 70cm one, you push the bottom of the button. And that's a really good feature. Once again, this is actually a lot more comfortable with the full-size button to talk on, and all round I think the UV82L is actually quite a good radio. But that said, as I said, the big thing in handhelds at the moment, the big selling point, is digital modes. And you're probably likely, if it's going to be your first radio and you're going to spend more than say the 30 or whatever US dollars that would buy you a nice commercial Chinese radio, you're probably going to be looking at either getting, an entry-level Yaesu. Now this is for System Fusion. This is the FT70D. I think it's a fantastic radio. The worst thing I've heard about them, and mine actually suffers this as well, is that the plastic that shows, I'll just turn it on, the transmit and receive, I'll just connect to my local node, those plastic lights, there's actually some hairline cracks in them. Does it impact your radio in any way, including the IP or waterproofing rating? I don't think so. This radio was never designed to be, waterproof like the VX7R. So I don't think it makes any difference at all, to be honest. But yeah, that's about the worst I've ever heard about this radio. For the money you pay, I think it's somewhere around 200 US dollars. I could be wrong. It's fantastic. It's a solid 2-meter radio. It's a solid 70cm radio. Uses lithium-ion battery technology. The batteries are nice and big. They're LiPo, so they're lithium-ion polymer, so they're flat rather than cells. And look, there is still some sealing around there, so there is some waterproofing there. But it's not sold. That's not the selling feature. I mean, don't go and chuck this in the water. It can get a little bit wet, like your iPhone probably, or your Samsung, but I wouldn't try and submerge it like you can with some of the earlier Yaesus. I would encourage you, if you're interested in Yaesu System Fusion, to go with the FT70D first. There is the option of the fully functional GPS radio, the FT2D, but realistically, and I might talk about this later, unless you know you're going to fully get involved in Yaesu System Fusion, that radio is an overkill, and it's 3 times the price. You could have other things in your shack if this is your first purchase. So if you want a traditional Big 3 radio in 2019, my recommendation is the FT70D. Now I'm running a aftermarket Diamond SMA to BNC adapter, partly so I can put on a whip when I'm outside or whatever, and when I'm just using it around the shack to connect to my local Wires X node, I just use essentially a floppy dummy load. So there you go. Now your other option, and this is I guess the cheaper way of getting into digital, is to go with your quality Chinese made digital radios. This is a DMR radio. The only real alternative are Motorola commercial radios. This one's mostly flat at the moment, I think, but it should turn on.
Frequency mode.
There you go. This once again will receive UHF-CB. They will ship it to you unlocked. So if you're going to use a parameter when you buy a parameter service, download the software, go and set it up properly, get it locked. Don't have an unlocked radio if it's your first radio. You don't want that hassle in the hobby. That said, it works beautifully for DMR. DMR is a very popular mode. There's a lot of support. The users are very friendly. Yes, the technical hurdle to getting it going is higher, but if you go and buy a good quality Chinese handheld like these, and once again I think these are around the 150 to 200 US dollar mark, I could be wrong, so they are nearing the price of a Yaesu. The main advantage is that's a very solid, nice radio. It's got a huge battery pack. It feels nice in the hand. It's actually waterproof, just like the VX7R. Now, I haven't completed reviewing this unit, but one of the things I intend to do is literally drop it in a bucket of water, or get my 6-year-old son to do so. So, I do quite like this radio. The fact you can program it by hand, you don't need a computer. That makes it good in, I guess, emergency situations where you might have to reprogram your radio for a specific frequency or talk group. You can do that on this. You can do that with Wise X, but you're much more likely, I suppose, to encounter DMR in an emergency situation than you are to encounter the proprietary system Fusion. So if you're, I guess, interested in doing MCOM stuff or being a bit of a prepper, you're probably going to get more value out of these than you are out of a Yaesu branded radio. Once again, I do like the Redivus branded radio. They've got good customer support. They're very, they've got dedicated English-speaking support staff out there to help you with the radio, and that's what I quite like about it. They sell factory direct, so I can't say anything but good things about this particular product. It comes with a charging cradle. That's one thing that's often overlooked, is that not all radios can be charged in a cradle. The Baofeng can't. I don't know if this one can. This one can. It's got, as I said, the more commercial the radio is, the more likely you're going to be able to charge it with a cradle. But not all of them come with it. The Asus here, they did not come with those charging cradles. They were a separate purchase. So, if it is your first radio, I'd encourage you to consider some of the Chinese DMR radios. Your only other option is to go for maybe, say, well, if you're feeling really cheap, go for the commercial, just 2 and 70. If you've got a little bit more of a budget, go for a DMR radio, I guess, if it's your first radio and you're interested in MCOM. If you're not really interested in MCOM, or it's not a big thing in your country, the FT70D is a solid radio. I love the Wise X system. I can connect to my node any day and, find someone who, normally wouldn't be able to use internet linking, and they'll be sitting there on their club repeater or something, and you'll be talking to someone in England or Scotland or something like that. It is a very popular mode. You can do the same with DMR. It's probably a little bit harder. I'm not an expert on it, correct me if I'm wrong. But for simplicity, the FT70D. For capability, probably the Chinese radios. If you can, and I would say get to that level of spend. Don't go for something too small, like a UV3. Don't go if you can only afford 2 and 70. Go for the more commercial of the Chinese radios. If you're gonna go, if you want the latest fashion or trend, which is digital modes, consider either the Asus FT70D or an Islands or another Chinese DMR radio of good commercial quality. But if you're interested in just, I guess, getting something second-hand that's a bit of fun, don't overlook older radios like the Alinco DJ G5 or the Yaesu VX7R. They've got 6 meters. Now, every radio from here on only has 2 and 70. Because the trend now is 2 and 70 in digital. So, yeah, don't overlook an older radio. You might find a bit of fun there. You might not. I mean, I must admit I've never had a 6 meter FM QSO, so, I kind of keep it in the shack because it can do it. But have I ever used it? No. But I must say, I kind of wish they had included modes like 6 meters and 1.13 centimeters, 1.2 gigahertz in some of the newer digital products, but they haven't. That's something you have to live with. As I said, this is a fashion or a trend-based market in the amateur radio segment, and everyone's competing to either deliver on price, deliver on unique functionality, or deliver on the latest trend. So I hope that's been, I guess, insightful as to what handhelds are like, what the marketplaces are like. I hope it has, I guess, informed maybe your buying decisions. As I said, if you're into simplicity and want a solid radio, you can't go past the Yaesu FT70DR, Fox Tango 70 Delta. It will do Wires X, the current, System Fusion and Wires X, the most popular and easily set up internet repeating digital mode at the moment. It's got, I believe, a solid build quality. I don't think a hairline fracture in the LED there really impacts the radio at all. It's cheap for a big 3 radio for a Yaesu. It is cheap and it's solid, and believe it or not, I use it more than it's my first choice over the FT2D. I use it more than the FT2D. So yeah, if you want the latest up-to-date handheld and you want simplicity, go for a Yaesu. If you want, I guess, something that you can probably spend a little more time thinking about, learning about the digital mode systems, the trunking, all that sort of stuff, go with a good quality Chinese radio like the Islands. If you can't, I guess, afford to get to that $200 level, and not everyone can, just buy a commercial Chinese radio, or buy a second-hand radio. You may have to resell the battery or whatever. That's not a big deal, but either way, you'll enjoy yourself. I guess welcome to the hobby if you're watching this video because you're just about to buy a handheld. Get on the repeaters, talk to some people, you'll have a bit of fun, and hopefully one day you'll end up with too many radios like me. These are all my handhelds, and I must admit I've got to get rid of a few. So I'm Jarrad VK3BL 73, and thanks for watching.